Good morning, guys. It's great to see you again. I will start with a brief introduction. We're a group of depth psychotherapists called Mind and Soul, practicing and living in Barcelona. My name is Sylwia. I'm a process-oriented psychotherapist. And I work in an international setting here in Barcelona.
Well,
I'm Kamen. I'm a Jungian psychotherapist and psychologist, and also psychodramatist, and I work here in private practice in Barcelona. And I'm Bulgarian.
I'm Carlos. I'm from Venezuela. I'm a clinical community psychologist, psychotherapist, and psychodramatist.
Thank you. So we met today to continue talking about a very broad and a very complex topic of trauma. We've started talking about it in the context of the current socio-political events that are happening not only in Europe, but in a broader context. And trauma is a very, very big and important theme. I've encountered it, I'm encountering it a lot in my practice. And it's something very deep and complex. And not many people understand it really well. Have you found any experiences in your practice related to trauma recently a little bit more, or have you found it regularly in your practice before?
Carlos, would you like to say something?
Yeah. I was thinking about the complexity of the trauma experience. In fact, back in Venezuela, we work a lot with this issue, but also focusing on the social trauma that we are living on. Trauma can be a unique experience related to our own history in our own family, but also trauma can be experienced by social conditions. We talked a lot there about the psychosocial trauma that we are living in. So back in the consulting room, the issues that people bring are not about their own history or their relationship with their parents or childhood. The typical issues that you can think somebody talks in psychotherapy. The issues that the people bring are related to the social situation in Venezuela, the oppression, the exploitation, the critical and political, economical situation, and the stress that this causes to people. You can say that this is traumatic. Well, yeah. This can be traumatic too, and this is a traumatic chronic condition. So it's a very complex theme. Yeah. I would like to talk a little bit about that, about the social trauma, but maybe later.
Okay. Yeah, I must say I don't work in the moment with any person directly who directly has recently been in a war situation coming from Ukraine. I have people, I have Russian and Russian clients and one Ukrainian client who are indirectly affected by the war, by what is happening, and who feel traumatized to various extents by what is happening, by what they are hearing from relatives, just by the fact that their countries are involved in this horrible war. And otherwise, in terms of the trauma, I work every day with trauma, which is trauma from childhood experiences, from life experiences, different experiences of people. And I believe the topic of trauma is largely underestimated in psychotherapy, not very well understood, including the post-traumatic stress disorder. Very often is underestimated how much this is actually related to early childhood trauma, which then a later event that is considered a traumatic event actually really unlocks or triggers again. And very often the treatment of post-traumatic stress is focused a lot on the traumatic event, let's say an accident or a violent act, and the importance of actually what happened in the history of that person before that event is undermined. So actually the concept of the complex the PTSD or complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a very, very helpful and useful one, because it throws light exactly on that, on how previous early childhood experiences actually are the basis, the trauma happening there, on which later trauma gets projected. And so that probably that's what makes the difference between people who don't develop post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms and people who develop such. Because it's a certain percentage of people, even though they go through very traumatic events, they don't necessarily develop long-term post-traumatic stress symptoms. And it is still unclear what the factors are. And most probably the answer to that lies in the early childhood experiences, what foundation actually the personality has to deal with that. So in that terms, what I see every day in my practice is that almost everything, almost all the problems that people have actually are related to early childhood trauma, or to trauma that happened in their lives before. And very often you could relate that to various difficult clinical pictures, including to psychotic, things in the psychotic spectrum, schizophrenia, personality disorders, and so on. Many of which are considered genetic, actually, or with a serious genetic component. To me, that's not that clear. I very clearly see my practice experiences from early childhood who actually can explain those serious problems in later life. So I would like, sorry, Siri, you wanted to say something?
No, I really wanted to relate to what you said, that it's an underestimated theme or topic in psychotherapy, because people associate trauma with something huge, something big. Of course, it can be a singular event or a series of events happening for some time, but it's not necessarily, it can be small things. It doesn't really matter how strong the input is, but on how we're experiencing this event in that moment. Do we have enough resources to deal with it or not? So it can be smaller things for small children, not necessarily giant factors like war or violence or abuse. So in general, I like to explain it to my clients or to myself that it works like the trauma is like a time capsule. So if a certain event was very meaningful at that moment for this person, it has a bigger power of affecting our body, our nervous system. And if those events were very strong for some time and were a danger to our health, our life, they violated certain values or rules, they constantly interrupt and modify our current life. Right? They are a part of our independent part of our psyche that is sometimes interrupting and affecting our decisions and our choices. So people after trauma, they are partially here and now in a real time and space, but a part of their psyche is frozen in that time capsule. So this is a very like a clear symbol of how it works, that it's like autonomous complex, we say, that affect our current and present life.
Yeah, and sometimes we are not aware of it. It has its own independence, no? We are not aware of that complex is working and determining our own life, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about my practice working with addictions. What you say is very clear in this field. We in addictions is usual to put the focus on the prevention, on the protection of the client, for not taking drugs, for not consuming drugs, or to stop the use. You know, we usually the therapeutic methods focus on that, but maybe we have to focus more on what is the causes of the addiction, and very often are related to this, to traumatic experience that in some way the addictions manage to cover, you know. It's so yeah. I was thinking about that, so it's just an idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that very clearly, how the trauma creates an emptiness, and the addiction then tries to feel that that emptiness. That very often the trauma is actually not an event that happened to a person. We're talking about early childhood trauma, but things that didn't happen. For example, things that were supposed to happen, to have a caring parent, to have safety, protection. This one itself is a very, very traumatic thing, something that your body and your psyche universally expects to happen. And like water, for example, if a baby doesn't get a child or a person doesn't get enough water, without knowing, their body gets traumatized and hurt, and they could die. So it's not something that happens, but something that doesn't happen. And the same thing is with the emotional input and the care and the presence of the parents. If it is not there, not enough, even if the baby is fed, or the child on a physical level doesn't lack anything, has enough food, clothes and shelter, and is not cold, this is far not enough. There are those psychological needs that need to be addressed from the very first moment after the birth of the child. And the lack of those actually is a very, very serious trauma that is indeed not noticed. From external perspective, everything could seem all right. The baby could be just crying, and we assume it's normal. Of course, it's normal the babies to cry. And from external perspective, everything could be all right, but the child at the same time could be extremely abandoned and feel extremely lonely, even though the parents might be even all the time in the house, but the emotional connection might be lacking. So this is how Carlos, that you were talking about dependencies, how I believe that the very early trauma relates to dependency. This emptiness is created, this need for the input of the other, the input of the parent, the connection. And when it is not there, then the child grows up with this constant emptiness. It's not one event. It's unnoticeable and invisible. And so this is the atmosphere that is lacking something. So later on in life, we try to fill in this emptiness with something, and very often this is a substance. Of course, it could be various things. It could be pornography. It could be like work. It could be like working non-stop, like workaholics, and it could be in sports, like dependency, if it's practiced in a way that that we use it as almost like a substance. So I completely agree with what you said, Carlos, that the dependency is very much our practically unaddressed trauma.
Yeah. This necessity of connection that we have as human beings.
Exactly.
In addictions, it's typical to talk about lacking in connection. You know, the need of connection is great because of that, because we don't have that connection in our early childhood. We see a lot of that in addiction, but not only in addictions. I mean, this can be a topic related to trauma as well. The necessity of real connections and healing and caring connections. This is part, I think, of the, well, this can be the intervention in trauma also, no?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Where I think a very, very important difference is what to say between connection and dependency in relationships, because very often people who tend to have this tendency to dependency and who have this early trauma related to that, they actually very often feel it with dependency on another human being, and they create these dependent relationships to
emotional
other
dependency,
people.
yeah.
Exactly, where the substance, there is no substance necessarily, but the other person is like a substance. And there is a big difference between being dependent on someone in relationships, having this dependent personality towards relationships, and connecting with people. Enormous difference. And there very often you would see parents who are actually dependent on their children emotionally, opposed to connecting with them, which is again extremely harmful to the children, because then in that case parent would be dependent emotionally on sharing with their children, having like their children almost like their child as a psychotherapist to the parent, opposed to really connecting to that child and understanding what the need of the child, the needs of the child are, and just being present for the child. So there is an enormous difference between dependency in relationship or connection. And the same thing in intimate relationships. People could be just dependent on each other without connecting actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, so also the lack of something that is actually triggering trauma mechanism is not always a very obvious reason for trauma for many people, right? And I observe it a lot in my practice, that people tend to minimize most of difficult childhood experiences, or not only childhood even. They are too overwhelmed with like daily situations without realizing that the lack of, for example, emotional support or connection or presence by a parent is actually deeply traumatic. But then they tend to, explain it to themselves, really going through defense mechanisms, saying that, oh, but it was not so bad. We had everything in our house. We weren't hungry. It's not such a big thing. It's not it's not always a reason for them to relate to to call them those experiences traumatic.
Yeah. Sylwia, you remind me a concept in community psychology. This is in community psychology, in social psychology, but you remind me of this concept of naturalization. When we naturalize some things, we think this is normal. In social trauma, this is very common to see people get used to situations that are very traumatic. For example, people living in war situations, they can naturalize hearing shots or hearing bombs, some things that you you see that are very terrible and traumatic. It can be naturalized. You remind me that concept, because maybe in individual life, in personal life, we can naturalize some things that we think they are normal, or we perceive it as normal, but they are not. And they have a very huge emotional impact on us.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Sylwia, I very much relate also to what you said about that. I very often see that in my practice. People coming actually and they're saying, "Oh, I had an ideal childhood," or that everything was fine. So that we are very often so unaware of actually what we were missing. And Carlos, as you said, that we normalize the abnormal.
Mm-hmm.
We normalize the lack of care, the lack of connection, and we in a way trick ourselves into thinking that yes, everything was fine, but there was everything. There was food, clothes, shelter. So it was warm in our house. So there is nothing to complain about. Very often we as human beings are not, I think in the process of evolution, the emotional needs are actually a very new thing in a way. The animals, they have as well emotional needs, but much more limited than the needs of the human. So evolutionary, we are probably at a very, very early stage. We have been humans for a very short time historically, just a couple of hundreds of thousands of years, like 200,000 years or so. And for millions and millions of years, we have been animals. So those needs are very, very new thing in human evolution, to the extent that we are not even completely aware yet that how important they are, that they are as important as food for the animals, for example. So the animals, they don't get traumatized in the same way like human beings get traumatized, just to a much lesser extent. Even if they are abandoned earlier, the signs of trauma in the animals is abandoned earlier by the parents is much less incomparable to the human beings. So I believe that evolutionary, we are still behind in that, in realizing what our real needs are as beings, as human beings. Mm-hmm. And this is not yet even sufficiently integrated in psychology, in psychiatry. Very often, I see very often colleagues, even psychotherapists, who are not aware of that. Psychiatrists and psychotherapists, very often you would see how they are unaware of the trauma. They would focus on the practical things. They wouldn't recognize if there is trauma in a family. I've been shocked sometimes in talking to colleagues, psychiatrists, how unaware they are, how when they share about the case, for example, how they focus on the practical things, which is very important, of course, and they completely miss the emotional side of things, of the experience of the child, for example, that they're treating. So I think this is not even integrated, not only in the common understanding about trauma when our clients come and tell and share, okay, I had an ideal childhood, there is no trauma, so there is something else that I need to address, and it's so obvious it is a trauma, and so obvious it's related to the early relationships with the parents. But this is not only not integrated in the culture in a way that people who are not psychologists are not recognizing that, but even practitioners and even psychologists often don't recognize that.
Yeah, I would say that. Yes, I would say, sorry, Kamen, I would say that easily half of the problems of humanity are somehow related, like mental health problems are and physiological problems are somehow related to traumatic events. Some of them related to childhood experiences that we tend to minimize a lot because they seem not big enough.
Exactly. Yeah. Even if you look at the war in Ukraine and the whole, if you look at like Putin, for example, I see him. Of course, this doesn't excuse the what he's doing in any way, but still, there is he's a traumatized child, like a person who went in that direction, who developed in that way as personality because of trauma, of course, and then all the distortions of reality that he experiences about the Western world, the hostility of the Western world, how his narrative about how the West wants to use Russia to destroy Russia and so on, which I believe he, at least on certain level, believes himself. It's not just propaganda. I think he believes that. How this is actually a result of trauma, this the paranoid position actually of yes, the other wants to harm me or my country, and I need to protect it. I believe this is a big part of what is happening. Actually, of what motivates people like Putin to do what they do and to be the way they are. The distorted perception of reality, which is a very, very central thing in trauma. That when there is trauma, we start to interpret reality, or we never start to interpret reality in a real way. We always interpret reality from the perspective of trauma and see other people, intentions of other people, very often interpret them as hostile, as threatening, because we are projecting the reality that we experienced before in very early stages, very early years of our life, and then forgot. And then we project it secondarily on the world in general and generalize it without being aware of that. And you could see that on micro level, not only on political level, of course, but in so many people who come to our practices and have this sort of to different extent paranoid perception about the world.
This is very interesting. That what you are talking about. I remember now that back in Venezuela, people were always like with anger. I remember walking on the streets and see old people anger, people, fighting each other in the street, yelling. And you can think, wow, but what happened to these people? We are all paranoid here. We are all mental patients. No, this is the social trauma that is also invisible. But you're talking about the invisible effects. You don't see that these behaviors are related to something traumatic. And in the social context, this applies as well, because I once read something about the survival mode that people enter when we are in political and social systems that are traumatic, that are oppressive and exploited and dehumanizing. The survival mode is when this traumatic way of living, you are in survival mode. So you are always like alert, like paranoid, like these people are going to hurt me, mistrusting people. This is a way of living that is often unconscious. You act like that and you are not aware of it. And in Venezuela, back in when I was there was a very, very difficult political, economical, and social situation. And all people, including me, I myself remember once driving in the highway. I'm yelling to people. No, I'm the horn of the car, putting the horn, and yelling to people. And when I arrived home, I said, "Well, what's happening to me?" It's like contagious. This anger, this it's incredible, no? Yeah, and I wonder how people in Ukraine, back in Ukraine, are doing with this. But the people that are refugees, we talked in the previous episode, no, about people going to Poland and living there. How these people are. I mean, in terms of trusting people, I'm in home with some people I don't know. I think about that, no? The social effects in relationships, the mistrusting, the paranoid, we can say, no? This paranoid way of survival, these all things that I connect with we are talking about,
Yeah, it's definitely deeply, deeply affecting the psyche.
Yeah.
And because most of us experience, if not all of us actually, experience any sort of traumatic event, something that was too big for us to deal with at that specific moment. I think it's really important to learn and understand about how it affects us long term. Yeah. Right? So if it happens if the symptoms of trauma last for, we say more or less a month or around a month, it's an acute stress disorder. If it's for longer time, like months and years, we would say it's a post-traumatic stress disorder. It is very complicated and complex. And if it's for years and years and years and years, it's deeply affecting the personality, and then trauma-related personality disorders unfold, right? And not many people actually realize it. Because the symptoms might be invisible, as you guys said earlier, right? Lack of empathy, disintegration, anger management, all of that.
Yeah.
And what you, Carlos, said about the psychosocial aspect of trauma, I found it deeply, deeply interesting. Maybe it's something we could focus on in next conversations, and as it's a separate big topic. Would you like to just briefly explain what does it mean?
Yeah, it's the idea that maybe we as psychologists tend to see and treat the personality and history, personal history, that is very important. But I think it's wise to consider that social relationship, the social system, it has an impact on us as well. That's why we talk about psychosocial trauma. And there is a social psychologist that is called Martin Baró that investigate this a lot, particularly in Latin America, about these effects on social relationship that has these political oppressors and exploitation systems, no, that are very typical back in Latin America, no, dictatorships and these kind of things, no. So it's interesting to see that these systems creates like a way of being. That's why I say about the survival mode, no? A way of being and function socially that creates mistrust in people. He talks about the militarization of the mind. He talks about this concept, no? That the militarization of the mind. We think all about black and white. This is the enemy. This is my ally. This is my enemy. You know, and that is very traumatic because it tends to dehumanize each other. Yeah. So I. Back in Venezuela, one of the things that we do a lot in the intervention is not only to attend, not only to see people in psychotherapy, but also to work in the community. I think it's very important in social trauma to work outside of our own office, you know, to work in the community, to make new networks, new good social networks, you know. And I talk about cultural, artistic, sports, to work with the community to create new ways of connecting each other, you know. Back in Venezuela, for example, there is a lot of new innovative and creative cultural and artistic things that in some way are a way of resisting. It's a way of resilience. I like that word, no? Resilience is very common now. How to manage and be resilient in a social traumatic situation, no? And the importance of the community and the social support and the creativity to you know, to create things that make some resistance to these oppressors and exploiting systems, you know. This is very important. I think it's very healing for the traumatic experience to do this, you know. So that's an idea that I think about that, no?
Thank you for sharing, Carlos, and Kamen as well. So I would say we could deepen the topic of resilience for sure. In the following conversations. Thank you so much for sharing.
One last thing. sorry.
Go for it.
I like to point out this is very important. I talk about resilience, about making, creating new social support systems, look for the good in the bad, I mean. But I think it's very important to, and I think we talk a little bit about that in a way, to validate also the traumatic experience, to validate the suffering and the emotional feelings that are in the traumatic experience. Because we, like Kamen said, no, it's easy to focus on the practical things. We have to be good, we have to be healthy, this positive psychology thing. But I think it's very important also to validate the suffering, you know. We have to be sad, we have to be sad. We have to cry, we have to cry. I mean, to validate, to make room for the suffering in the traumatic experience is very important. That's
Absolutely. No, I mean, I would say misconception about trauma, that not making space for that, or just wanting to help the person to drift away from that, which is very helpful sometimes. To be, of course, the person to develop that capacity to distance themselves from intrusive thoughts and overwhelming experiences, but also to, as you said, Carlos, that's super central, to make space for working with the trauma, with the traumatic experiences, validating that and making really enough space, as long as it takes for the person to work through that, to help the person to see that, and to make space for that, which many approaches in psychotherapy, actually many approaches in psychology and psychotherapy to a big extent miss that point. Of there are so many approaches that are focusing on the, let's say, positive thinking, or just disconnecting from the negative experience, in a way repressing that, which long term could be actually a harm to the person. If you just repress an experience and learn to constantly repress certain symptom opposed to addressing what the symptom is telling you actually, and healing that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for sharing all of that. I hope we can continue deepening the topic, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah.
Me too.
Great. See you guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Till next time.
Thank you. See you next time. Till then.